I've heard the stats so many times about, well, the average age of the farmer is not super young. What's going to happen, to farming in the United States and family farms and all of those things if we look 20, 30 years into the future? And I think that it will just add additional concerns as to what the future of farming in the United States will look like if the resources that are needed for beginning farmers are taken away. My name's Jen Villwock, and we have I guess by most standards, it would be considered a small piece of farmland, which is 42 acres in Vermillion, Ohio. We see a need and we have a desire to be the best stewards of that land as possible. One of the issues, especially for a beginning farmer such as myself, is that you often don't really know where to start. And for that reason, a lot of the folks that we've interacted with in terms of through the NRCS or other nonprofit conservation organizations has been really instrumental in kind of helping us think about, well, how do we want to implement things? What's a reasonable step-by-step plan to really be able to execute some of our big dreams?
My name is Rachael Maysels. I'm the Executive Director at FairShare CSA Coalition, and our mission is to build resilient food communities by investing in farmers and empowering eaters. And for a very long time, the organization was a small team and many volunteers, and the federal funding about 4 years ago was able to really launch FairShare into this next iteration of impact that we could have. So we went from not having many federal grants to having 3 awarded at once. And that really allowed us to grow our team, expand our impact, expand a lot of our programs. And so we went from sort of a bootstrap, really localized organization to having this wider network thanks to these federal grants. So in the fall of 2024, we were awarded a USDA Agriculture Marketing Service grant, the FMPP, so the Farmers Market Promotional Program, for a $500,000 amount over 3 years. And that was split up among different organizations. But we at FairShare were the convener of that grant, and it directly supported the National Community Supported Agriculture Innovation Network. So in this grant, it was to fund research to better understand the impact of the CSA models, also to expand more access to CSA programs throughout the country. So really having more direct consumer to farmer interaction, and specifically for marketing and promotion support for these farmers, and directly support the ability of small-scale farmers to sustain their livelihood.
Hi, I'm Casey Ellington. I, along with my husband, operate Ellington Farms here in Northeast Ohio. We are a beef, pork, and chicken farm. We work a lot with our local communities to provide our proteins. We are primarily a beef operation, and that's something that's always been close to our hearts. I grew up on a beef and tobacco farm. My husband grew up on a dairy. We can't imagine a life without cows. It wouldn't really be a life worth living. But we like to use our cattle to connect with our community. And with the Ohio Can Project, we felt like we had a solid footing to do that. But it really met our mission as a farm to feed our neighbors and to give access to really high quality food to those who need it the most. We were very excited to get our first purchase order. It really knocked our socks off. For someone to make that big of a purchase from us was life-changing. And this did make up, it trumped everything I have ever done before in selling of beef. I think we doubled our numbers, if not quadrupled our numbers. It was a lot of cattle that we were able to work with and move. And that's a lot of mouths fed. And we're really quite devastated that we're not going to have that opportunity again. And it's just really upsetting. It's going to be financially really difficult, and it's going to impact more than just us.
In our case, we had grant funding through both the Inflation Reduction Act through EQIP, as well as through Climate Smart Commodities programs, to help us with our goals. And, it's been very frustrating because being able to participate and being awarded some of that funding in many ways is kind of like validation of like, hey, these ideas are valuable and viable, and there's support to have them done, and you get feedback from all sorts of experts that can help reinforce why these are good things. And then for different policies to suddenly come down and then have those programs paused and then eliminated, it really takes a lot of the wind out of our sails, especially with us being beginners and we don't have, a wealth of, generations of equipment or, a lot of family knowledge as to how to do these things. So then it puts us into a situation where, yes, I remain very committed to the goals and wanting to execute this plan, but it's very much of a scramble now to figure out, well, how do we make this happen in a way that isn't going to put us personally in a financially precarious situation. Yes, the goal is to be productive and for this to be something that's financially viable, but we also see the opportunity to implement practices that will help things like soil health and climate resilience. And I think in today's ever-evolving global situation, having that sort of resiliency and making sure that we're being good stewards and ensuring the health of the land is really important. But unfortunately, because of all the policy changes recently, it's introduced a lot of uncertainty, and it is really quite frustrating because, we've worked at this point, for more than a year to really develop plans that make sense, that ensure that the goals that we have aren't going to be detrimental to the land or have, bad impacts that we weren't thinking about.
We got the news of termination on February 14th. A nice Valentine's Day surprise. And we were only able to execute about 3.5% of this project and the budget before it was very abruptly turned off. We received the news of the termination quite early on, and so there was a lot of shock initially and sort of disbelief that this could happen and hoping there'd be an appeals process, which there hasn't been. So all of these activities have had to be reimagined, paused, scaled back, or completely canceled. Farmers that were going to receive payments for their time, lead workshops, had to scale back different types of promotional activities, and really trying to reimagine what this CSA Innovation Network can look like and alternative routes of supporting small-scale farmers.
The other thing too that's always in the back of my mind is that the timeline is ever progressing, meaning, that while you may look and say, well, maybe it's just going to be a year delay or you'll have to apply for some new programs. When I think about what I want to do, a lot of what we're planning to do is to put fruit and nut bearing trees in the ground. And every year delay is years of delay in terms of when are those things finally going to produce. So, we could be looking at, a decade of setback just from a couple months worth of policy pauses and changes. My concern as someone who has been impacted by these freezes and then these cancellations is that it's unclear to me how these policy changes have taken into account the individual farmers and farming operations that they are impacting. I think everyone can support the goals of, different aspects of conservation agriculture in terms of building soil health, climate resilience, building, a local economy around local food that's healthy. I don't think anybody has significant objections to those things, but there's no mechanisms that are in place to say, okay, now here's where you can go to get this sort of support. So it just really leaves us in this area of a lot of just uncertainty and not knowing how to execute these plans in a way that is going to be viable for us financially in the long term.
We had already made investments into purchasing the cattle to be finished for our once and sometimes twice a month deliveries to the food banks. And had made those investments in those cattle and booked with the butchers and had those butcher dates. So it's not going to only impact us and our business, it's going to impact our butchers and their employees, and it's going to impact how that goes out into our community, because that's a lot of people that we worked with that they employed.
These blanket actions are hurting so many different populations and communities and their own constituents, which seems ridiculous. And one thing that is bipartisan and that we all need is food and access to healthy, fresh food. And the attack on these food system initiatives are making that very difficult and just hurting our system as a whole. And I'm trying to find the right words because it feels a bit powerless right now in terms of what can do. But when I think of communicating with these lawmakers, I want to communicate the urgency of the economic need of farmers.
If I could give a message to any of the decision makers in regards to the LFPA Ohio Camp program, it is that the farmers are the solution to feeding our neighbors in our communities. Sometimes we need help in the way that that is distributed. Access to these programs is crucial. The food banks need all the support they can get. As a farmer, we would just like for you to hold up the end of what we were told we would get, because we made financial plans and investments into that, and we would have to hold up our end of a contract if it was given by the government. We would just like the same respect to have that honored, and hopefully come up with a long-lasting plan in the future to still be able to provide Ohio-raised beef to Ohio's communities.
Hi, my name is Nicole Wolcott, and I work on federal policy with Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. If you're like us, you've been seeing farmers and the USDA in the news a bit more than usual. Over the past several months, there have been many changes in the USDA with the second Trump administration, and our team has been keeping track and reaching out to our community of farmers, eaters, organizers, and organizations. The impact of funding freezes, orphan farm bill programs, and lessening USDA staff has made a wide reach of concern and frustration. Our team has been collecting stories from those in our community so that we can better advocate with our members of Congress and with the USDA to support small, diversified, and organic farmers. We have a deep appreciation for Casey, Jennifer, and Rachel for taking the time to talk with us. These are just 3 of the 100 of stories we have received. This Earth Month is a reminder that we need to be advocating for the farmers stewarding their land to receive the support they were promised and need. If you want to engage or have any questions, reach out to us at policy@OEFFA.org.